So when God first created the world, he designed a garden called Eden, where he would lovingly and harmoniously dwell together with human beings. In the garden, there were two important trees.
One was called the tree of life, which was symbolic of King Jesus and the life that he provided to all created things.
The other was a tree of death, which was symbolic of satanic selfishness that took life away from all created things.
Human beings were originally created to be in union with the tree of life, from which they received life.
However, in satanic selfishness, our first grandparents ate from the tree of death. When they did this, their union with the tree of life was broken, and they were forever enslaved to a tree of death.
Yeah, and as a result, human beings were banned from the Garden of Eden, cut off from the tree of life, and cast away from the loving presence of God. In fact, two large angels called cherubim were set at the entrance of Eden to guard it and to keep human beings from re-entering.
Yet, God designed a way to continue to dwell near his people. God made a tabernacle that could go everywhere that his people would go.
Inside the tabernacle, he made a very small room that was symbolic of the Garden of Eden. The room was sectioned off by a huge curtain. Two large angels were imprinted on the curtain, guarding the entrance to the small patch of Eden.
And behind the curtains, there was a golden chest called the Ark of the Covenant. The presence of God dwelt inside the golden chest, along with three items that represented the life that God provided in the garden: a blossoming tree branch, a bowl of heavenly bread, and the words of God written on two tablets of stone.
Yet again, two angels were placed on the top of the golden chest, one on the right and one on the left. These two angels were guarding the chest to keep human beings away from the Garden of Eden.
So even though they dwelt near his people, God was unable to dwell together with his people. They were still enslaved to the tree of death.
But incredibly good news was coming.
It sure was, because even though human beings were not able to enter the garden to dwell with King Jesus decided to become a human being, to come out of the Garden of Eden and to dwell together with us in the land of death.
Yeah, he was the tree of life coming into the world. Everywhere that he went, he brought the life of heaven. He brought love and peace and laughter and freedom and healing and bread and wine and joy.
All the fruits of the Garden of Eden were coming to human beings through him.
Yet, as we said, human beings were still enslaved to the tree of death. The only way they could be rescued from that tree was if King Jesus took their place on that tree.
And that's exactly what he did.
King Jesus allowed himself to be nailed to the tree of death so that human beings could be set free. He died on the tree of death so that human beings could live in the garden of life.
And it gets even more amazing because after Jesus died, he was placed in a tomb. And 3 days later, he rose from the dead. The tree of life defeated death and came out of the tomb.
Yes, and the Garden of Eden came with him. Now the life of heaven, through King Jesus, has entered into the world.
So that's the reason we sing Joy to the World each year at Christmas.
Exactly, because the King of Love is alive and is bringing his garden into the world.
Yeah, and here's the really cool part of the whole story that actually drives the point home. When the disciples came to the empty tomb and looked inside, they did not find Jesus. Instead, they found two angels. The very two angels who had been guarding the entrance to the Garden of Eden. And just like the two angels on the top of the golden ark, one angel was at the head of where Jesus had been laid, and the other was at the foot.
Oh, wow. And what were they doing?
They were sitting down. Their job was finished. The king had risen. The tree of life was alive, and the garden had come out of the tomb.